part of the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator Lee, you're next.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. I feel a great sense of pride at the fact that we're now marking the 5-year mark from the passage of the First Step Act. This was a huge event. It was a big accomplishment within Congress, but far more importantly, this is a huge development to the men and women who have benefited from it ever since then. Especially for those who are now able to go on and live peaceful, law-abiding, meaningful lives with their families and in their communities. And it's a real testament to the wisdom of this bill that we've got you, Mr. Charles, here with us. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I got to know you shortly after you were released from prison as the first individual to be released under the First Step Act. Jaron, it's great to see you as always, and your work in the last administration was absolutely essential to getting this across the finish line. And of course, we have here today a number of members of this committee who were very involved in this measure, and it was a pleasure to meet, to work with the chairman, with Senator Booker, with Senator Cornyn, and so many others who were part of the effort. This, of course, was not the beginning or the end. It did represent a culmination of many years of work together on both sides of the aisle until this finally got passed and signed into law by President Trump. And there was a lot of hard work that went into this effort on this committee on both sides of the aisle. It's absolutely essential as we celebrate this milestone, Mr. Chairman, that we differentiate between this legislation and the overwhelmingly positive effects that it's had. We differentiate this measure and what we celebrate from it from something that's totally different from it, with which it's often confused and can sometimes be mistaken. The violent crime wave sweeping across our country has absolutely nothing to do with the First Step Act. That is a wave that's caused by a completely independent force, something having to do with prosecutors across the country who are just deciding not to prosecute entire swaths of crime, including some significant categories of violent crime, some of the most egregious offenses. And it's alarming to see the complete disregard that some prosecutors show for public safety in their diluted effort to advance some other kind of interest other than the rule of law by just promising not to prosecute entire categories of crime. Now, some have criticized the First Step Act for today's crimes, but that's wildly inaccurate. The First Step Act, of course, does absolutely nothing to change the sentences applicable for violent crimes. As Mr. Smith said, Mr. Jaron Smith, the First Step Act, quote, is about developing and implementing a system in which nonviolent prisoners are given the incentive to improve their behavior and ultimately improve themselves, gaining the education and tools they'll need to succeed when they eventually do leave prison. I couldn't agree more. And blaming the First Step Act for problems that are caused by deliberate prosecutorial inaction is about the same as getting your cavity filled by your dentist one day, and the next day when your basement floods, blaming your dentist for the flooding. The results of the First Step Act itself have been overwhelmingly positive. In August of 2023, the Council on Criminal Justice released a report showing that individuals released under the First Step Act had a recidivism rate 37% lower than those released prior to the FSA who were similarly situated. And even with the 10,000 prisoners released under the FSA beneficiaries accounted for a minuscule portion. We're talking about 0.02% of national arrests, 2/100ths of 1% of all national arrests. I meet regularly with First Step Act beneficiaries, like Matthew Charles here, including last month when I met with a group of entrepreneurs, homeowners, men and women, who are now able to live with their families in their communities and lead very productive lives. And some folks, like Weldon Angelos, were facing life sentences or effective life sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. Mr. Angelos, of course, was what first sparked my attention in criminal justice reform, when back in 2004, he was sentenced to 55 years in prison for selling 3 dime bags of marijuana to what turned out to be an undercover reporter, someone working with the police, an undercover agent, a confidential informant. And because of the fact that he was charged for each of those dime bags sold over a 72-hour period, and because he had a gun on his person at the time of those transactions, totaling no more than $350, a gun that was neither brandished nor discharged in connection with the offense, he was subject to the 924C stacking problem, where those were each treated as individual predicate offenses under the 3 strikes law, leaving the federal judge who sentenced him no choice but to give him 55 years. Judge Paul Cassell, himself a former federal prosecutor, hardly known as Minimum Cassell, not somebody known as being soft on crime, made the unusual step of issuing an opinion disagreeing with the sentence he was about to impose. He said there are rapists, there are murderers, hijackers, terrorists who don't get this much time in prison, and yet I, as a federal district judge, have no choice but to send you away to prison for 55 years. And then he said something that would haunt me ever since then. He said, only Congress can solve this problem. And so that's what got me involved in this effort, and what got me originally working with Senator Durbin after I got to the Senate, and grateful to him and so many others who worked hard on this effort. But the work is not done. One of many problems that we've got with the 924C stacking problem, we fixed it prospectively in the First Step Act, still needs to be fixed retrospectively. Mr. Angelos is out of prison only because President Obama commuted his sentence and President Trump later pardoned him. But there's a lot left to be done, and I look forward to doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Lee, and I thank you personally.